We are going to be learning a little bit more about views and Razor. We already know quite a bit, and we're going to quick review what we know, and then we're going to be learning some things that are new. While we talk about what we know, I am going to kind of work through and take a look at the project that comes with our chapter. Now, in order to run this, we do need to update the database. And I'm going to go into app settings here and change the name of the database because I'm pretty sure I already have one or a version of the Guitar Shop on my system. So I'm going to call this one Guitar Shop Chapter 7. And then I've got the Package Manager console open. And I'm just going to update database. And while that is updating, we're going to go ahead and talk about what we already know. So what we know, controllers return views. By default, the file name of the view is the same as the controller's action method name. So if we open up a controller, we can see that there is, even though this is kind of small, there's an index action method and an about action method in the controller. This is the home controller, and they both return views. So if we come down here into the view folder and we expand out home, you can see there's a corresponding about and index view. Views are sent to the client. If you want to return a different view, so let's say you have an action method called index, but you don't want to route to the index view, then you just, in double quotes, indicate the name of the view that you want to route to. So if I did this, both index and about would route to the about view. Views don't have any of the business logic. The business logic is in the model, and there also may be some business logic in the controller. All of the views by default are pulled into the layout, and they are pulled in at render body. That gives all views a common navigation system, which is in the header. It also gives all views a common footer. And if you look, the entire structure for your HTML is in the layout. And that includes the head section where you're pulling in various libraries and CSS. If you wanted to create custom CSS, you can. That is done in www.root, and the CSS folders, typically where you would put it. And so by default, they have something called site CSS, and I can tell that some custom CSS has been created for this particular app. You can include both. And you will notice in the Razor Pages Zen Spa, which I'm going to go ahead and view real quick, that you are going to be working with for the hands-on exercises. We do have Site CSS and Spa CSS, which is customized. Both of those are being brought into the layout view. Okay, so we bring in the site CSS first, and then below that we bring in our custom spa CSS, which will override anything that is in the site. If for some reason you don't want a view to use the layout, at the top of the view, you can add this razor code and it will bypass the layout. The view import file, which is located in our view folder at the bottom, specifies using directives and pulls in models, and in this case, tag helper information, and it is applied to all the views. The view start file. This defines the default layout, and you can change it, but uh, it may be better to just leave it at layout because that is one of MVC's conventions. If you need to pass data back and forth between the view and the controller, and the data is not part of a model, then you can use view bags. View bags are dynamic and you can add properties to them. In the views themselves, we use tag helpers to help bind the model data to our views. Our tag helpers are used to generate links, and they're also used for menu navigation. We have been using them already quite a bit, so this should not look new to you. So when we specify ASP area, ASP controller, ASP action, these are all tag helpers. If we want to access model data that is passed to the view, and the way that it is passed is through the controller, and controllers typically have to pass data to views for edits, deletes, updates. If there is an error and they have to redisplay a form for adding data, the model is also passed back and forth. So the way they do that is, let me see if there's a good example here. Nope, let me pull in the Razor pages that you guys are going to be working with. And the service controller has some. So in order to do that, pass the model back and forth, you do need a context variable, which we have created here. And let's see. Here is an example of a create. So this is the initial get where the form is empty. And then here's the post. So if there is any kind of a problem, then the post has to send the model back. And you'll notice that in the parameters here, we have a services class, and we are creating an object here that represents our model, and that is getting passed back. And then you'll notice the same thing for the edit. Okay, so here is the initial get. And so the ID parameter is optional. However, if you are editing data, it needs to be there. So assuming that it's there, we use a link query to find the row in the table. We store it and then we pass that along. And then here is the post. So what happens in the post is either the model state is valid, which means there's no errors, and the database gets updated, or there are errors and that model gets passed back so the errors can be displayed. So this passing back and forth of models is very common. If we want to access that model data over in the view, we use Razor Code for that. And there's a couple different ways that you can do it. This technique in this particular index view is using an HTML helper. Display name for basically pulls the name from the model itself, and display for pulls the data. And you can see that the model is being brought in to the view here. And it's basically brought in as a list. Now, if we look at details, you can see now that this is just one. It's not a list. And here it is displaying all of the data. So it's still using display name for and display for. Okay, and it is in a data list instead of a table. And if we take a look over at the project that goes with Chapter 7, you can see a little different way of pulling in the and connecting to the model. We've got at model product up here, and that actually pulls in our data. And then when we want to directly access the data that is stored, we use at model with a capital M dot and then the property in the class. So that is basically what we know so far. So we actually know a lot. As far as what we know about Razor, we know it begins with an @ sign. We know that you can code blocks with curly braces or expressions, which are embedded into HTML. We know that it is not really a programming language, it is basically a markup language. And so what happens with Razor is that the server reads the page and it actually runs your Razor code first. And it processes all of the Razor code and then it sends the HTML to the browser. So when the browser gets the page, there is no Razor code in it. So it's the Razor View engine that is interpreting and rendering the code for the view. Razor conditional expressions let you make selections. Razor loops can actually process collections or arrays, and we're going to take another look at those today. Razor code can perform tasks that cannot be done in the browser, like accessing a database or creating dynamic content. C# Razor pages use the CS HTML extension, and you can see that on all of our views. And with this current version of ASP.NET Core, Razor actually can run on different platforms. So that's kind of what we know so far. And we are going to be specifically looking more at Razor in the next section.